It's our NBA panel consisting of DraftKings contributor Kenny Ducey and RotoWire's Nick Whalen. So we did that DFS thing earlier. So right now I need you to tell me if the following spread, totals, or props are too high or too low, which is why we call this segment too high or too low. Let's start with a prop here. Zion Williamson against the Nets. Point total set at 28.5. Too high or too low, Kenny?
I think it's too low. Look, this guy's usage rate was at 34 and 36% before the Pelicans played the Knicks, which was kind of a different animal. You know, they couldn't really drive in on a pretty imposing front court. Frankly, it was just a good defense in general. The Nets are not that. The Nets are, you know, in the bottom 10, in the bottom 7, actually, of the league in defensive rating for the entire season. Over the last 7 games, it hasn't gotten much better. You know, they've kind of had sporadically good defensive performances, but tonight they're going to be without 7 players. No Nick Claxton for them, which will hurt them in the front court. It'll also hurt their rebounding here, and the Nets generally aren't even that good of a rebounding team to begin with. So I think Zion Williamson here should just, you know, have his way, whether it's on putbacks or just driving in or even on post-ups where the Nets are allowing 1 point per play. I think that he should have plenty of ways to score the basketball. And again, just you can't ignore the fact that his usage has just been through the roof over the last really 7 games, minus that Knicks game. So I think that he should have plenty of the ball here and he should get it. I mean, he's gotten 30 points on a pretty consistent basis.
Yeah, Nick, are you nodding your head in agreement?
Yeah, I am. And we kind of hinted at this in the last segment. I mean, it's such an ideal matchup. You know, it feels crazy that we're just harping on like how important Nick Claxton is to this Nets front court, but it's true. I mean, when you consider the other options behind him now, I mean, DeAndre Jordan, they're kind of doing everything they can to not play DeAndre Jordan, and now they're virtually going to have to throw him out there. That's a pretty major mismatch against Zion. Everything stacks up in his favor. You know, we actually haven't seen Zion score 40 points yet in his NBA career. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say it's going to happen tonight, but if ever there was a situation for it to happen, I think this would be it. He's come very close a number of times this season. He has a few 38-point games. He had 39 against Denver back in late March. I mean, this is a game that I think the Pelicans are so inconsistent that even though on paper, you know, they're the team that should probably win this game, the Nets will probably find a way to keep it close. Kyrie will probably keep them in it. Zion's probably going to play 35 plus minutes. This really might be the best matchup that he's walking into all season.
Nick, the Hawks favored by 11.5 hosting the Magic opened, I believe, at 13. Is that too high or too low? 11.5.
Well, I was going to say 13 was a little too high. So I'm not surprised that it's now down to 11.5, like you said, at the DK Sportsbook. I think the Hawks can cover it. I mean, there's a pretty big mismatch in the front court here, especially. You know, Wendell Carter's looked okay for Orlando, but Clint Capella has been fantastic for Atlanta all season, especially on the glass and as an efficient finisher. So I think there's a mismatch there. You know, I know we talked a little bit about, you know, liking Cole Anthony's individual matchup against Trae Young. I like that from a DFS perspective. I don't know if I like it from a winning NBA basketball games perspective. And we also have to keep in mind the motivations for these two teams. I mean, Atlanta has a ton to play for. They're playing for playoff positioning, playoff seeding, which can swing dramatically in that kind of middle of the Eastern Conference night to night. So every game's really important to them. And every game could not be less important for the Orlando Magic, who, you know, are kind of trying to stealthily, I think, improve their lottery odds as much as they can.
Yeah, Kenny, you kind of alluded to that in our last segment, just how terrible Orlando is and how they're basically playing anyone and everyone.
Yeah, and, you know, I used to be a big narrative bettor. I still am. I still like betting teams that have something to play for versus teams that don't. But to me, you know, look at what's happened with the Dallas Mavericks. I mean, how many of these games for the Mavericks, they need to win these games. Luka Doncic came out and said he doesn't want to play in the play-in tournament, and they've lost some really, you know, winnable games they should be winning. Especially one to my Knicks. So I don't think that it's always as cut and dry as, oh, well, the team that needs to win is going to cover here. I do think that the Hawks win this game, though. I am in agreement with Nick, but I think that this is still too high. When you look at the games that the Magic haven't covered this 11-point spread, right? The blowout losses, they've come to San Antonio, Milwaukee, Utah, and then, like, we won't talk about Washington. Like, Washington was just a weird one, but I mean, these are good teams, right? Even Washington's playing really well right now. These are all really good teams, really efficient offenses, good defenses, too, with Milwaukee, Utah, and San Antonio. That's not what the Hawks have. The Hawks don't have a bad defense, but they're certainly not good. The Magic haven't been good on either side of the ball, but I think that they have shown a little promise lately. They have some guys that can score the basketball. And to me, I think that they hang in this game for a little bit. they've shown like they've looked like they actually do care in the late stages of this season, even though they're not playing for anything. Because you have plenty of guys here, even a guy like Gary Harris, just playing for more minutes in the future, playing for another contract. So I think that the Hawks don't cover here.
Kenny, Clippers and Blazers game total 224. That's down 2.5 points from where it opened. Too high or too low?
I still think it's too high here, even though it's down. The Blazers are 20th in pace. The Clippers, what style of basketball the Clippers play. They love to grind out the pace here. They're 4th to last in the NBA this season. So and again, a good Clippers defense and a Blazers defense that over the past 10 games, they have, it appears on paper that they just haven't fixed any of their defensive problems. But when you actually look at some of the performances they've had since CJ McCollum's been back, they have shown that they can play some defense. They've had some nights where they've played really stellar defense against good offenses. I think that this game can still go under because of that. You also still have, obviously, the Clippers dealing with, who knows who's going to be injured tonight for the Clippers. It's the end of the NBA season. Everyone's out every night. You had Nick Batum out the other night for them. Patrick Beverley's still out. Serge Ibaka. I think they could still be missing a few guys here. So, yeah, I think that this ultimately could be a pretty slow, low-scoring game here. I still like this under. I think it's a little too high.
Nick, where do you sit on this? Too high or too low?
I think it was definitely too high at first, and I think I'm with Kenny. It's still a little bit too high at 223.5 for my liking. I mean, he mentioned the Clippers and how slowly they play. Not a team that's looking to get up and down by any means. They'll grind you out in the half court. I'm more worried about the Portland side of this. I think the way it goes over is maybe it's a blowout in favor of the Clippers and they just have a big night offensively. But you look at the two games without Damian Lillard so far, they've scored 107 and 101 against the Spurs and the Hornets, respectively. Super small sample size, of course, but Portland is 29th in pace over the last two games played. They're playing at a pace of about 95 possessions per 100, which is very, very slow. So without Damian Lillard, that offense, completely changes. I know Kenny likes Anthony Simons tonight. I have in general been a supporter of Anthony Simons. There have been times when I've been very much tempted to jump off that ship because of how inconsistent he's been. I will admit that I still love him. He is not Damian Lillard. I have my doubts about, whether Portland can kind of hold up its end of the bargain when you're talking about maybe going over that number.
So De'Aaron Fox has a point total of 29.5 against the Timberwolves. Too high or too low? I know we mentioned him a little bit in the first segment. Kenny.
I think that this is a little too low. I mean, look, I think that he's going to cover it. It's very high. So I don't know really what to say in terms of the technical answer to this question. By the way, I will never forgive Anthony Simons for beating Obi Toppin in the dunk contest. That was absolute robbery, but I
forgot that even happened,
Anthony
honestly.
Simons. I have no idea how he did that. And I thought he might win anyway. Okay, so Minnesota has allowed almost 25 points per game to opposing point guards the last 2 weeks. So that's why I don't think this number is that crazy. Like at first, I was like, this is way too many points. Now you're looking at specifically the points allowed to opposing point guards. De'Aaron Fox should get almost all of those minutes. The Timberwolves are 4th in pace over the last 10. The Kings are 9th. And also, as Nick alluded to earlier, the Timberwolves are worst, dead last in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games. They are not playing any defense whatsoever. De'Aaron Fox here. We want to talk about a team that is playing for nothing in the Sacramento Kings. I mean, he's just, the usage has been through the roof for him. He's just taking all the shots. He's the only guy who's looked like he has any sort of pulse on offense. They did show a pulse last game, but this team just hasn't really scored. So they've just put the ball in the hands of De'Aaron Fox. He's also been able to get to the free throw line a lot lately. So I like De'Aaron Fox here to cover the 29.5. It seems like a ridiculous number, but when you look at the matchup, it's actually not that crazy.
What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, not a whole lot else to say. I've talked about how much I love Fox from a DFS perspective earlier, and I think Kenny's perfectly right to say that it's not like this. The prop is not set too high or too low. It's probably just about right. I mean, you look at Fox's last 15 games. I think he's at 29.7 points per game, so it's kind of right on what you'd expect. He's been on some nights where he's at 27, the next night he's at 33. It's kind of been right around that territory pretty much every single night, but the matchup to me certainly implies that he has a better than 50% chance to go over 29.5 tonight. I mean, this Timberwolves team is horrific on defense. The pace should be up. And part of it too is, guys like Tyrese Halliburton and Buddy Hield, especially Halliburton, have slowed down a little bit of late. Halliburton, his minutes have been slashed the last couple of games. It looks like he's maybe hitting somewhat of a rookie wall. And, when you really can't depend on your other guards for production, Rashawn Holmes is going to miss another game tonight. He's been out of late. It's kind of a situation where Fox has no choice but to take a ton of shots, attack the basket, get to the free throw line, and inevitably rack up those points.
All right, dude, real quick here on Slate Approved Pick. Favorite bet on the DK Sportsbook tonight, Kenny?
It's Pelicans -3. They're 14-16 against the spread at home, which, okay, it sounds bad, but they've only covered in 44% of their games. So that's actually good. They play their best basketball at home. The Nets have 7 guys out. Without Durant and Harden on the floor, they've been kind of abysmal on defense and offense. I think the Pelicans here cover this. It's a must-win game for them. They're fighting for positioning here in the West. They need this win. I think that they come out strong and finally cure what ails them, what's ailed them in the last few games anyway.
Next, Slate Approved Pick.
Yeah, I like that one, and I'll double down on that and say Lonzo Ball over 13.5 points. You're not getting a ton of value here, as is typical with these point props on DK. He's at -113 for this one. I like it as a bounce back. I mean, he's played so badly these last couple of games since returning from injury. I feel like he's virtually, has to bounce back. And for as great of a matchup as it is for Zion Williamson, it's a pretty good matchup for that Pelicans backcourt as well.